Okay, we'll come back to what are we in, part four, I think. So I'll restate the slide I said at the end of the last one, but logistic growth allows us to take into consideration carrying capacity, i.e., the maximum population that a given habitat can support, whether it be via space, food, water, light, whatever that limiting factor is. And the logistic growth assumes that population growth will slow and stabilize, and eventually the growth rate will become zero, which would stabilize the population through time. So logistic growth, unlike geometric and exponential, which just shoot off to infinity, eventually levels out. And this allows for density dependent factors, meaning at low populations, there's low competition for food, higher survivorship, higher growth. At high populations, there's more competition, overall slower growth. And so here's an example of number of trees in an area. You can say it was heavily grazed. Some trees colonized the area. The first trees that came in had a lot of success, grew quickly. Their young then started growing and growing and growing until some limitation happened. Now, in an example of a meadow going to a forest, that limitation is likely space. Now they're space limited. The trees need a certain amount of size. They become light limited, and then once they had filled in this meadow or colonized this meadow, eventually the area is packed. There's no more room for any additional trees. And so that population then leveled off right about here. And we can think of this as an addition to the exponential growth equation. And so here we've got our change in population over change in time equals the intrinsic growth rate in growth rate per capita, or R, and then N is the population, in this case, population density. But we multiply that by this figure of 1 minus N divided by K, which is the carrying capacity. So what that's doing is it's altering this growth rate function here. So the easiest way to think about this is if N and K are the same thing. If our meadow can support 350 trees, that's K, 350 trees. If we have 350 trees in that meadow, then that's N. 350 divided by 350 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 times all this business is 0, meaning our growth rate from this year to next would be 0. And if we had, say, 700 trees here, 350 here, this would be a number, let me see, think about it. Need a negative number there. That might not work. Let me think about that. 1 minus. Yeah, that works. Sorry, I'm tired. Okay, so if this is what did I say? 350. Let's call it 700. So if our population is 700, our carrying capacity is 350. This would be 2. 1 minus 2 would be negative 1, which means we have a negative growth rate. We have a loss in growth overall. When densities are low, logistic growth is similar to exponential growth. So you have few individuals, lots of available resources, and lots of growth. When N is small, 1 minus NK is close to 1, and the population increases close to that of R. So it's not impacting R because this is a factor we're multiplying R times N by. So if you have R times N, your intrinsic growth rate times your number, you multiply that by 1, it's not changing it. If you multiply it by 0, it's changing a lot. As density increases, growth rate approaches 0 as population nears K. So here's the exponential growth. It just keeps going and going and going and going. at low population sizes, they're both quite similar, but the logistic growth population growth starts to slow down until it reaches K, and then ideally stabilizes and maintains there at K, where the logistic growth, if that model were to be true, the population would keep growing. It wouldn't stop at K. But that doesn't meet reality, right? So these are models. If we're predicting out what's going to happen in the future using an exponential growth function, that's true in the absence of resource limitation, but we're assuming some form of resource limitation, i.e. K. So here's an example of that applied. This Pearl and Reed did a logistic growth curve on data from 1790 to 1910, and they estimated the nation's carrying capacity at 197 million people. So they assumed our growth rate would plateau off and approach 197 million quite slowly. Their model wound up being true for the first few years, and then the dots are our actual population. Our population kept going exponentially, that our population has not leveled off. What they didn't predict in paper was published in 1920, but what they didn't predict in 1920 is new technology. So as we develop both new technology as well as importing food from other areas, we've yet to become resource limited. So right now resources are not limiting our population growth. And a life table is a way of looking at how organisms move through their life history when they reproduce, what survivorship is at different ages, realizing that it's not constant, particularly depending on how animals develop. So this is useful for helping us decide what's the limiting life stage, how will impacts in like juvenile stages impact the overall growth of the population. And so in a life table, we look at the age class members of the population who fall under a specified range, the age structure proportion of individuals in each class, and how that age structure influences whether the population will increase or decrease. Here's age distributions in two different countries, Japan and Nigeria. Nigeria tends to have a younger population. Younger people, particularly in the 15 to 44 year range, are typically more reproductive. And so because of their age distribution having more young people, they have a higher growth rate compared to Japan, which has a much older population and a smaller, a relatively lower percentage of their population is people in that 15 to 45 year category. So here, population in millions. So Nigeria has a larger population, but they've got a higher population of people in that age range. Survivorship data can be graphed in a survivorship curve. Plot the number of individuals from a hypothetical cohort that will survive to different ages. Survivorship curves can be classified by three general types. We'll look at this three different ways, and there's three types. So when we talk about survivorship curves, there's type 1, 2, and 3. Type 1, this is your number of survivors on a log scale. So we're all starting at 1,000. Type 1, they start with 1,000 newborns and a relatively high survivorship until they get quite old and there's a drop-off. Type 2, your chance of dying is the same throughout your entire life, from when you're quite small to when you're quite old. You basically have a fixed chance of being killed. Type 3, when you're very young, you are very much likely to die. once you get to a certain size threshold, you can live for quite a long time. So we'll look at two different examples of each of these three types. So a classic type 1 could be a mountain goat. This is a Dall sheep, rather, or humans. You're born, you have a lot of parental care, you can typically survive quite well for your first few years, and then for Dall sheep, harsh winters start to kill them. And so generally, if you make it through your first year, you're generally doing pretty good until about 8, 9, and then things start to go downhill pretty quickly. So that's an example of a type 1 curve. High survivorship through the early parts of life, low survivorship in the late parts of life. Things that die of old age. You could think of it that way. Type 2, did I use the example yet? No, I got another example. Type 2, pretty much constant chance of surviving from year to year. Birds are given an example of this where you can think of 10% of them die every year at each life stage. So meaning that your chances of mortality, of dying at age 1 is pretty much the same as at age 6. Barnacles, really any broadcast spawners that have, they're actually not broadcast spawners, but any organism that puts out a lot of larval stages, the majority of them don't survive. So here you can release 1 million eggs and only 50 of them are going to make it to age 1. Now once they make it to age 1, life's pretty good. So what is that, 900, I can't do math right now. Almost 1 million of your brothers and sisters died. You're one of the lucky ones that got stuck to a rock. Now that you're stuck to a rock, you're doing pretty good. You're likely to survive all the way up until maybe 8 years old. So the hard part is getting through some life history stage. In this case, it's primarily the larval stage. It's true for a lot of fish. Anything that lives in a nursery habitat where it can hide, and then it comes out, and then it hits a certain size threshold where it's no longer in danger of predation. They can also follow that same curve. So here's another example of type 1, type 2, and type 3. So type 1, we've got some dude running to humans, generally, generally long-lived, start to die off with age. Squirrels, at pretty much any point in their life, they're equally likely to get pecked off by a predator. Oysters, similar to barnacles, lots and lots of larvae. If you're a larva that happens to land in the right spot, then you're doing pretty good and you'll persist for a long time. Survivorship can vary among species, between males and females, among cohorts that experience different environmental conditions, and the effects of these conditions on populations can be assessed. A cohort life table follows the fate of a group of individuals all born in the same time or cohort, mostly used for sessile organisms that are highly mobile or have long lifespans or difficult to track. So we're going to walk through this table, and O'Connell, we're going to walk through this table and make sense of it, and then make sense of some of these terms, and then we'll kind of revisit them again. So first we've got age. So age 0, 1 million. These are larval, this is barnacle balanus, larval barnacles floating around. And let's walk down here and then we'll go over. Age 1, of that million, 62 are alive. Age 2, of that million, 32 are alive. Age 3, 20, 4, 15, 5, 11, on down to age 8. where there's only 2 individuals still alive from that initial cohort. So this is looking at a cohort. This is looking at 1 year, 1 million larvae are released. What happens 1 through 8 years later? Okay, so this is what's happening. This is kind of our death, our numbers, our population numbers of that cohort. The number of offspring, this is the pure number of offspring from the entire in X. This is fecundity. Yeah. So this is the number of offspring from each of these age classes. So these are not feeding back into this population. This is following one cohort through time. So age 0, our larvae have no babies. Year 1, we've got 62 individuals. They produce a total of 285,200 offspring. Year 2, they produce just nearly 300,000. Year 3, these 20 surviving individuals produce a total of 232,000, and onward. So this is the number of offspring produced each year by this one cohort. So you could total all this up and figure out how many offspring did they produce versus how many offspring were in that first cohort. This is our survivorship. So this is the percent that survived from year 1. Not the likelihood you make it from, year 0. Not the likelihood you make it from year 3 to 4, but of the initial year 0 population, of that 1 million, how many survived? So year 1, 0.000062 survived of the initial 1 million, which makes sense. If you multiply this by 1 million, you'll get 62. You have a 0.0034% survivorship from the first cohort, not from year 1 to year 2. So this number goes back to the start of the cohort, year 0, on down to the survivorship of a bunch of zeros and 2, which means that of the initial 1 million, 2 are still alive. Fecundity. Fecundity is just a word of how many eggs you have per female. So there's a change here with fecundity and age, meaning our 1-year-olds, they're able to make some eggs, but not a lot per individual. There's more of them, so they're contributing, almost the same number of offspring as the year 2 group, or 1-year-olds are. And they're producing more offspring than our year 3 and 4, despite having a lower fecundity, 4,600 eggs per individual, compared to later in life when they're bigger and fatter, they can produce 12,000 eggs per individual, but there's just more of them. So year 1 and year 2 are really the biggest contributors to the future generations, although they are the least fecund, there's just more of them. L times F is the survivorship times fecundity, and this is a measure to figure out how each generation of this cohort is contributing to the next generation of barnacles. And so it's a way of trying to figure out how much of this is giving to the next generation. We'll jump to the formal definition here in a second. And if we sum all of this up, if we sum up this entire column, this becomes our net reproductive rate. Meaning if we sum up this entire column and it equals 1, that our survivorship times fecundity equals 1, then we've produced the same number of offsprings for the next generation as this cohort, meaning the population is stable. So if this adds up to 1, births and deaths balance out the population and it will not change. If RO is greater than 1, there's a net increase in offspring produced in each generation and will increase the population exponentially. And then if RO is less than 1, the population will decrease. This one is age times survivorship times fecundity divided by the RO. And this gives you a generation time. So you've got an organism that lives for a long time that's producing young all the time. How do you figure out when it goes from one generation to the next? It's the combination of age, survivorship fecundity, and divided by the growth rate, the net reproductive rate. So we'll look at these terms independently again. So IX is survivorship, proportion of individuals that survive from birth to age X. And this is, again, the number of that age, 3, 4, 5, divided by N at 0. Not the survivorship from year 3 to 4, but the survivorship from year 0 to year 4. Fecundity is the average number of offspring a female will have at stage X. So at a given year, how many eggs do they produce? As in barnacles, we saw fecundity increases with age, but then kind of plateaus off. The sum of I and F is the net reproductive rate. What's the net reproductive rate for that generation? For that cohort. As a net, are they producing more offspring than it took to create them, or as a net, are they making fewer offspring than they started out with? So, in the example of barnacles that start off with 1 million, if through that life table they only produced 500,000 offspring, they would have a net decrease, a net negative reproductive rate. If through that life table the population that started off with 1 million larvae, if they produce 2 million larvae, then we'd have a net increase in our reproductive rate, a net positive reproduction rate. So again, an RO of greater than 1 is an increase in population, and the RO of less than 1 is a decrease in population, and the RO of 1 is deaths and births level out. Generation time, I mentioned this before, but generation time is the average of all parents, of all offspring produced by the cohort. So you've got individuals, 1-year-olds that are making babies all the way up to 8 years old. But in general, what's the average age of the parents? What's the average generation time? So it's the sum of age times IF divided by the RO. And you can estimate R from the generation time. It's the natural log of RO divided by the generation time. And so static life tables, survival and reproduction of individuals at different ages during a single time period. This is used for mobile organisms or ones with long lifespans, requiring an estimate of age of individuals. And so instead of following one cohort through 10 years, you sort of see what each age class is doing for a given year, and they kind of build a life table that way. And so managers may want to alter population growth rates to decrease pest species or increase endangered species. One method is to identify age-specific birth or death rates that most strongly influence population growth rates. So meaning, you basically, instead of following one cohort through time for, loggerhead sea turtles, they can be, I think, 40, 50 plus years old. Instead of following the same cohort for 50 years, you just kind of say, okay, here's an age class of individuals. What's their likelihood of survivorship? Are they reproductively active? What does that look like? And go to another age class and another age class, and then kind of build out a picture of what that looks like. This is going back to the early efforts on loggerheads focused on the eggs, because that's what we see. And so they were able to use this static life table to look at the different stages of life history for loggerhead turtles and see what would happen. So right now, we're looking at their exponential growth rate R. Again, 0 is stable, greater than 0 is population increasing, below 0 is population decreasing. even if we increase survival 90% for the eggs and hatchlings, the growth rate based on that population stage is still negative, meaning we can save almost all the eggs and they're still going down. For juveniles and large juveniles, and across actually subadults and adults, if we can increase their survival by 90%, we will have a positive R. So these life stages, if we can increase their survivorship, we can get the exponential growth rate above 0, and then the population will persist. So now, instead of, or in addition to saving turtle eggs, TEDs have been developed, these turtle excluder devices. So one of the main mortalities on sea turtles was entanglement in shrimp fishing nets. And so these TEDs are devices that prevent the turtles from going in the shrimp nets. And the number of turtles in nets declined by about 94%, but it took decades, will be decades before we know if these TEDs actually helped increase turtle populations. So here's a picture of a happy turtle swimming away from a TED. Okay, that'll wrap up for chapter 11.